Midday hangar. White light poured from the glass roof. Jet engine lay inert, panel glowing red. Billionaire CEO Victoria Vance entered. Her heels echoed sharply on the floor. The team stood in a tense, uniformed line. Single dad mechanic Miles emerged from beneath the engine. Victoria glanced, a slight, mocking smile touching her lips. Maintenance shouldn't be giving opinions on data interpretation. A few nervous laughs followed. Miles quietly bent back to his inspection. His rolled-up sleeve revealed a small, precise technical symbol tattooed on his forearm. A senior veteran engineer froze, staring at the mark. The atmosphere in the hangar began to solidify. Miles was a ghost in the high-tech hangar. He wasn't on the company payroll. He was a highly specialized, non-union contract mechanic hired for difficult, late-stage assembly reviews. He was known for silent efficiency, completing tasks others rushed or missed. His life revolved around tight schedules, single fatherhood, wrench time, and his daughter's school runs. He preferred routine and quiet competence over the corporate noise. His world was the 3 o'clock pickup, the smell of graphite dust from his daughter's drawings, and the undeniable truth of physics. Miles lived by a rigid schedule that demanded total focus at work so he could be fully present at home. He took pride in the fact that no complex machine ever beat him. The failures were always human. His tools were carefully maintained, not for show, but because his work demanded microscopic precision. He carried a small custom-made acoustic sensor, worn smooth from use, which he referred to internally as the second ear. This tool was his true advantage, bypassing the digital noise of the engine's own complex diagnostics. Victoria Vance, in contrast, managed a life measured in quarterly earnings and market capitalization. She was the embodiment of aggressive, quantified success, surrounded by proxies and reports that buffered her from any unquantifiable reality. The current engine malfunction, classified as a minor sensor anomaly, was a severe threat to her Q1 launch schedule for a proprietary stealth drone project. Every delay was costing her firm millions in potential market leverage, and more critically, investor confidence. She was under immense pressure from the board, who saw any technical hiccup as a failure of her management strategy. Her entire worldview was filtered through the lens of cost-benefit analysis, leading her to trust the expensive presentation of data over the inexpensive reality of a physical flaw. The engine fault was initially classified as a software-side sensor anomaly by the lead internal engineer, Mr. Davies. Davies was a PhD in control systems, and his report, filled with complex algorithms and reassuring probability curves, convinced Victoria to accept this conclusion. Miles, however, working deep inside the carbon fiber shell, wasn't looking at the probability curves. He was feeling the subtle differences. He noticed a persistent, barely perceptible low-frequency vibration in the hydraulic lines, a harmonic that was entirely anomalous for a clean engine cycle. When he pressed his acoustic sensor against the pressure regulator housing, he didn't hear the expected fluid flow. Instead, he detected an audible, irregular hiss, a symptom of internal pressure bleeding at a rate too slow for the digital monitors to register as a fault, but fast enough to indicate a critical structural integrity issue. This pressure deviation was the real problem, which the digital sensors were compensating for, thus dangerously masking the root cause. He filed a concise, one-line report detailing the acoustic anomaly and the immediate need to physically check the pressure regulator housing, Part 4A7 for microfractures, not the software. He kept it strictly factual, devoid of emotion or speculation. The report landed on Davies' desk. Davies, already scrambling to apply a software patch and nervous about presenting further delays to Victoria, saw Miles's note as bureaucratic overreach, a distraction from just a pair of hands. He dismissed it instantly, prioritizing the digital fix suggested by his own salaried team. Miles watched the dismissal from the hangar floor. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He had seen this countless times, the refusal of management to accept simple, inconvenient physical facts when faced with the comforting complexity of digital data. He knew that arguing would only cost him the contract and, more importantly, distract him from his mission, ensuring the engine did not fail catastrophically. He understood that his primary goal was not to gain recognition, but to ensure that the pilot and the millions of dollars of hardware were safe. He returned to the engine, knowing he was now performing a quiet, parallel investigation. He knew the corporate culture. Those who speak without a title are quickly silenced. But those who know the difference between a calculated risk and a guaranteed failure hold the true power, even if that power is used in silence. Miles continued his manual inspection, his focus absolute. He mentally calculated the shear forces and thermal loads on the suspected component, finding solace in the cold, tangible truth of the machinery beneath the layers of digital complexity and corporate denial. His quiet competence was his only defense. The next morning was a whirlwind. 3 major news outlets were set up across the tarmac, ready for Victoria's carefully choreographed pre-flight excitement briefing. Victoria, in a sharply tailored suit, radiated confidence, desperate to maintain investor perception and project forward momentum. Davies was a wreck. His team had pushed the software update, and the digital readouts were indeed green, but the internal system logs he secretly pulled showed residual data history with conflicting, highly irregular pressure spikes that vanished too quickly to be isolated or trusted. He had a clean report, but a cold knot of dread in his stomach. The tension was immense. Victoria, speaking to the press pool, introduced the stealth drone project, selling the dream of supersonic, autonomous flight, completely oblivious to the physical time bomb lying inert just a few hundred feet away. Miles, having spent the entire night analyzing his own independent physical data logs and correlating them with the known performance envelope, knew the danger was imminent. He walked directly out of the service bay and into the executive briefing room, a clear, flagrant violation of every established protocol. He stood near the door, his grease-stained overalls and worn presence a jarring note of reality in the pristine, media-ready environment. "The engine is not safe for flight," he stated, his voice calm, firm, and audible enough to cut through the executive murmurs. "The software compensation is masking a physical defect. I propose a 10-minute verification of the regulator housing before engine start. That defect will result in a catastrophic rupture above 8,500 RPMs. Victoria's entire attention snapped to him, her eyes burning with immediate, aggressive disdain. She saw the audacity of the intrusion, the disrespect for the established chain of command, and the massive public threat to her schedule. "Mr. Miles," she said, her voice dripping with calculated contempt, turning her back slightly to the journalists to keep the drama internal. "We are discussing proprietary flight controls, not fixing a sedan. We don't stop millions of dollars of R&D for guesses, and we certainly don't take advice from contract labor who have been explicitly overruled. You trust the sensors or you step aside." Several mid-level engineers laughed loudly, relieved that Victoria had taken control of the narrative, confirming the superiority of their digital models. Miles simply held her gaze, refusing to be dismissed by her tone or her wealth. Davies, terrified of being drawn into the conflict, weakly tried to interject. "Ms. Vance, his original report mentioned a microfracture potential. Perhaps a quick visual check?" Victoria cut him off with a look of pure fury. "The data shows green, Davies. Let's proceed with the run-up." Miles knew arguing further was futile. He acknowledged her order with a silent dip of his head and turned to leave. He understood that Victoria was actively choosing ego over prudence, status over safety. As he walked back toward the engine, he made a final, decisive, and highly visible action. He reached the main hydraulic cluster and pulled a specialized piece of heat-reactive thermal chalk, a tool used to visualize thermal stress on components, from his pouch. With 2 swift, deliberate strokes, he marked a precise point on the pressure housing, circling a seam that showed abnormal heat displacement under residual pressure. This was the exact location of the impending microfracture. Victoria followed him out, needing to publicly reassert her dominance over the physical space he occupied. She saw the chalk mark, a primitive, unprofessional slash of vibrant orange color on the highly polished dark alloy, equating the mark with vandalism. "Remove that immediately," she commanded, pointing at the chalk like a stain. "This is a clean, sterile environment, Mr. Miles. Do your job or leave the premises." Miles looked at the glaring orange mark, then directly at her. "It's there for a reason, Ms. Vance. It's the truth your screens are hiding. When this engine starts, that chalk will be the only thing telling you where the failure initiated." He offered no further explanation, letting the raw, physical statement hang in the air. Victoria, consumed by the urgency of the press briefing and the need for the engine run-up to demonstrate progress, ordered a junior technician to wipe the chalk away immediately. She did not stop to question the meaning of the mark, only the mess and the offense it created to her aesthetic standards. The technician nervously scrubbed the chalk off. Miles stepped back from the engine, crossing the final safety line, his hands at his side, his eyes fixed on the now clean power housing. He was waiting for the undeniable truth of physics to speak. A few minutes later, the flight crew was strapped into the cockpit, systems armed, ready for the ignition sequence. The countdown was starting, the sequence measured and irreversible. The engine would reach full power in T-minus 60 seconds. This was the moment before the risk became catastrophic reality, a high-stakes gamble where Miles's integrity was the only sure bet. The flight team confirmed readiness. The chief pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, flat and professional. "T-minus 20 seconds to engine start." The thrum of the fuel pumps intensified. If you'd like to see how this moment unfolds, you're welcome to subscribe and continue with us. T-minus 30 seconds. The hangar was now a thunderous environment, a symphony of high-frequency preparation. Systems checks, cockpit chatter, and the low, heavy building thrum of fuel pumping through the high-pressure lines. The air vibrated with anticipation. The senior veteran engineer, Mr. Reynolds, who had started his career in the unforgiving, analog days of field mechanics, wasn't looking at the screens or the meters. He was staring, with profound unease, at the spot where the chalk mark had been, and then at Miles's forearm. Reynolds, a man nearing retirement who had seen corporate decisions turn into smoking wreckage, was deeply troubled by the arrogance of the dismissal. He approached Miles, standing by the console in quiet defiance of the launch order. Reynolds spoke softly, covering his mouth as if passing a dangerous secret. "That mark on your arm, the one I saw earlier. It's the Phoenix Seal, isn't it? The non-official field maintenance mark for the 71st Squadron's Deep Field Diagnostics Unit. They maintain the X-59 program." Miles slowly rolled his sleeve further up, revealing the small, stylized bird etched next to a series of calibration lines. A highly specific technical cipher, known only to a tiny, elite group of military-grade field engineers. It was a badge of applied knowledge far rarer than any academic degree. Miles met Reynolds' gaze, his expression unreadable. "It's a reminder, that's all. I was discharged 10 years ago." He avoided giving a title, knowing the certification itself was the title. Reynolds stepped back, his eyes wide, recognizing the true magnitude of the situation. The Phoenix Seal wasn't just a unit patch. It was the mark of a technician who had been required to perform field repairs on experimental military hardware. Repairs often done without factory schematics, relying purely on fundamental engineering principles, intuition, and on-the-spot calibration. The X-59 was the notoriously demanding, hyper-complex prototype jet that demanded mechanics be diagnosticians, structural engineers, and material scientists all at once. They were the troubleshooters for the impossible. The entire engineering room, overhearing the sudden hushed exchange, fell silent. The sophisticated digital countdown, still flashing T-minus 15, suddenly felt far less important than the quiet exchange between the two men. Davies, the lead engineer, looked terrified. Victoria, sensing the profound, terrifying shift in the atmosphere and the sudden paralysis of her senior team, walked swiftly back to the consoles. The time was ticking away and the pilot was waiting for the final confirmation. "What is going on? Davies, Reynolds, I need a go, no-go confirmation now." Reynolds, his career flashing before his eyes, pointed a shaky finger at Miles. "Ms. Vance, you need to understand. This man has a certification that supersedes every credential in this room. He was certified to maintain the most temperamental, structurally complex engine ever built. He sees a flaw that our compensated models, based on generic data, cannot. We must listen to him. If he says stop, we stop. Victoria stared at Miles, seeing not a contract mechanic, but a man holding a secret of immense, life-saving value. Her corporate mind recognized the immediate, fundamental shift in leverage and authority. Explain the chalk mark, Mr. Miles. Quickly, every detail. Her voice was now razor-sharp with genuine, desperate inquiry, stripped of all mockery. Miles stepped up to the main display, completely ignoring the green check marks and the digital countdown. He pointed instead to the structural schematics on the side screen that detailed the engine's physical composition. The flaw is in the mounting alloy for the pressure regulator, Part 4A7, specifically the bolts manufactured in the 2021 batch. This batch has a known but obscure molecular stress weakness when exposed to sustained oscillation above 9,000 RPMs, a frequency specific to this engine's unique cycle. He continued, his voice steady against the rising engine noise. The model is compensating for the symptom, the slow pressure drop, by aggressively overpressurizing the secondary line. But the secondary line is now pushing against a microfractured 4A7 mount. The moment we hit full ignition, the thermal and kinetic stress will cause the mount to fail, and the engine will ingest its own hydraulic lines. It will not be a software failure. It will be a physical rupture caused by a material flaw that our digital models were deliberately programmed to ignore because it simplified the simulation. He didn't need to consult a manual. The information was etched into his applied knowledge from years of working directly with the truth of the metal. Davies, frantic, pulled up the manufacturer's obscure internal material safety sheets, accessible only through a hidden back door in the system. He gasped, falling back slightly. The material data sheet confirmed the catastrophic stress weakness in the specific 4A7 batch, a detail intentionally omitted from the standard test model to streamline the simulation and reduce testing time. He's right, Davies choked out, sweat beading heavily on his forehead, his career evaporating before his eyes. The simulation assumed a safe 4B alloy. The physical component installed is the faulty 4A7. Victoria, faced with undeniable, peer-validated evidence that her team's pride and her own urgency had nearly destroyed her company, made the only decision possible. Her voice was firm and final, ringing with absolute authority. Abort the test. Shut down the engine immediately. Full diagnostic check on the 4A7 component. Now. T-minus 5 seconds. The cockpit crew received the emergency abort signal. The engine sequence immediately ceased, the heavy building roar dying down to a safe, controlled quiet. The massive disaster, the public catastrophic loss of the engine, the prototype, and potentially the pilot, was averted by a piece of thermal chalk, a technical tattoo, and 10 seconds of quiet, uncompromising expertise. The power dynamic in the hangar had shifted completely, not with a bang, but with a sudden, profound, unnerving silence. Miles's calm, factual communication had demolished Victoria's belief system that status and cost equated to competence. She saw the difference between theoretical risk analysis and the life-or-death certainty of an expert who had worked under fire. The quiet hero had saved the day simply by refusing to be ignored. The immediate aftermath was a scene of controlled chaos. Victoria, her face a mask of iron control, sequestered the media, reporting a minor sensor calibration issue that required deep-dive verification, a temporary fix to manage the PR disaster. But she knew the internal disaster, the humiliation, was far more complex. She immediately ordered a full secure lockdown of the hangar. She then called Davies and Reynolds into a private, soundproof office adjacent to the hangar floor. Davies was sobbing quietly. Reynolds was simply exhausted, the adrenaline draining from his body. Victoria didn't shout. Her voice was dangerously controlled. Davies, you relied on simplified simulation data and dismissed a valid physical warning to save face. You are suspended pending a full review. Reynolds, why did you wait until T-5 to speak up? Reynolds, regaining his composure, met her gaze. Because, Ms. Vance, I know the Phoenix SEAL. I worked alongside that unit 30 years ago. They are trained to know exactly when their warning crosses from opinion to certainty. When he made that chalk mark, he was telling you, you have chosen failure. He gave the warning. It was your system that failed to heed it. Reynolds's defense was a condemnation of her culture. Victoria dismissed them both. She was left alone to process the magnitude of her failure, her reliance on the digital proxy, and her own arrogance in dismissing a man in overalls. She found Miles working alone, quietly replacing the faulty 4A7 mount with a verified 4B component, his movements precise and non-dramatic. The tension between them was thick, not of anger, but of the profound shame mixed with respect. The cost of that component failure, it would have been 9 figures, Mr. Miles, plus the cost of the project delay and the irreparable damage to our reputation. We owe you everything. You saved the company from my mistake. Her voice was low, raw, and gravelly, a sound none of her executives had ever heard. Miles stopped working, his wrench falling silent. He didn't look up. No, Ms. Vance, you owe me nothing. I was paid to find the flaw. That was my job. The failure was in the communication chain, not the component. The truth was there. The system simply chose to value a PowerPoint presentation more. She pressed him, her corporate curiosity reignited by his unexpected choice. The tattoo, the Phoenix SEAL. Why are you here in a contract role doing assembly checks with a background that could place you in any major aerospace leadership position? That experience alone would command a defense contract worth 10 times your annual consulting fee. Miles finally looked up, his eyes tired but steady. He cleaned his hands slowly on a rag. It's a reminder, not a title. Titles are for the ego. They remind me that the truth is physical, and it is usually simple. And it also reminds me that I prefer to see my daughter every day after school. That kind of commitment doesn't fit into your executive schedule, Ms. Vance. I chose a clear conscience and a structured family life over a corner office and the constant noise of the boardroom. Victoria absorbed the insult, realizing he wasn't talking about his career. He was critiquing her entire hollow life, the high-pressure, high-ego existence that nearly cost her the company's future. Her prior mockery, her casual dismissal of his existence, had been based on a profound ignorance of where true value lay. She didn't offer a dramatic apology. She offered the ultimate corporate currency, systemic change. Effective immediately, the quality assurance and maintenance divisions will report directly to me on all safety incidents, bypassing the engineering hierarchy. Furthermore, I am implementing the Miles Protocol. The what? He asked, genuinely surprised, stopping his work completely. The Miles Protocol, she repeated, her voice now back to its authoritative, decision-making pitch. Any maintenance personnel, regardless of rank or title, who identifies a physical discrepancy that contradicts digital data, has the authority to issue an immediate, non-reversible hard stop on any test or flight preparation. That decision cannot be overturned by the engineering team or by me until physical verification is complete. You taught us that safety doesn't need a committee. It needs an absolute, non-negotiable voice. The change was profound. It wasn't a promotion for him. It was an overhaul of her corporate culture, elevating physical safety above digital optimism and executive pride. Miles finally allowed himself a small, private smile. The system had changed. He had secured the right for every pair of hands in the hangar to speak the simple, unvarnished truth. A week later, the engine was fully repaired. The faulty 4A7 batch components were recalled globally, and the new safety protocol was rigorously enforced. Victoria had spent the week in the hangar, not her office, observing the quiet deference the engineers now showed the maintenance staff. The hangar now had a new, quiet sense of professionalism, a culture of listening. Victoria called Miles to her pristine corner office, a silent, luxurious space that now felt oddly empty compared to the grounded reality of the hangar floor. The Miles Protocol has already saved us 3 times this week on minor, overlooked alignment issues and faulty torque readings, she stated, bypassing pleasantries. It works. I am creating a new position, Chief Operations Reliability Officer. reporting only to me. Seven-figure salary, stock options, private jet access. It's yours. It is a title worthy of the Phoenix Seal. Miles looked out the window at the city skyline, the endless vertical climb of corporate aspiration, then back at her. He saw the genuine respect in her eyes, but also the trap of her world. The refusal. Thank you, Ms. Vance. I am deeply honored by the offer, but I must respectfully decline the title and the compensation package. Victoria's expression didn't waver, anticipating this. Why? You deserve it. You earned the title and the authority to enforce your will across the company. Titles are heavy, they create distance, and they bury the simple truth under layers of status and paperwork. I want to keep listening to the machine, Ms. Vance, and I want to pick up my daughter from school at 3 p.m. every single day. That is my non-negotiable metric of success. He made his real request, the one that proved his priorities were unshakable. The only thing I ask for is the budget to train more mechanics to use the Phoenix Seal mindset, to listen for the whisper that the software misses. I want a decentralized network of hard stop experts, and I need your absolute written guarantee that the hard stop authority remains absolute, even if it delays a launch by 6 months, and no matter who is giving the order. Victoria nodded, her mind already running the numbers and seeing the long-term exponential value of his request. This was a man who traded a lifetime of wealth for 1 hour a day with his daughter and the right to be truthfully competent. She saw integrity operationalized. Done. You will be retained as an independent, permanent, extremely highly paid consultant. Unlimited budget for the training program you design, and your schedule is sacrosanct. I will personally manage your calendar to ensure you leave by 2:45 p.m. every day. Herr Furnum. Miles stood to leave, the negotiation complete, having won a revolution, not a promotion. The atmosphere was one of profound mutual respect, based not on money or status, but on competence. He walked back down to the hangar floor. He checked the status board one last time, noting the new hard stop authority marker displayed prominently in bold red. He felt the weight of the company's safety resting on his quiet choice. He crossed his arms, the cuff of his clean work shirt covering the Phoenix Seal. The truth of his capability no longer needed to be displayed or shouted or used as leverage. It had been acknowledged, institutionalized, and respected. Miles was now the most powerful man in the company in the only way that mattered, holding all the essential authority and none of the ego. The single dad had saved the company, not with a title, but with his integrity. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe. Real skill doesn't shout,